Winifred comes home.
I am dreaming of the mountains of my home, of the mountains where in childhood I would roam. I have dwelt 'neath southern skies where the summer never dies, but my heart is in the mountains of my home.
Winifred, the little quarry engine, was in the museum in America. She had been brought all the way from Wales to be there and was very happy telling visitors all about her life back home, pulling slate wagons and working in the quarry. But after a while, less people came to see her. Sometimes the days would slip by without any one at all. Once she asked a boy who was passing, "Hey, where are all your friends?" He stopped instead. "Dunno," he said. "Guess they're all back home watching TV." "It is very, very bad," said the Bugatti. "We are jiggered," said the Jag. Eventually the owner of the museum came to visit. "Sorry guys," said Mr. Ullman. "I have to close this whole place down. I'm moving you to a warehouse next to my racetrack at Indianapolis." Winifred and the cars were sad to leave, but they knew a warehouse was better than a scrap metal yard. Soon they were on their way. Winifred, the Bugatti, and the Jaguar were all put in the store, tucked away with lots of shiny cars that were snoozing in a cool, clean warehouse. "Howdy," saying one to sleepily to the new arrivals. The warehouse was so close to the race track that Winifred could hear the distant roar of racing cars as they zoomed around the circuit. She yawned. "There's nothing to do here," she said. "No rail tracks, no passengers, no work to do." And soon she fell asleep too. Meanwhile, not so far away, in Terre Haute, the two engines, Ogwyn and Glitter, that came with Winifred on the very same ship from Wales, were in an old abandoned stable on the Holman estate. With no one to light their fire or tracks to run on, they too had fallen asleep. And so they all stayed for many years and would remain so if something very special hadn't happened. One morning the doors of the warehouse edged open. There were loud noises and light poured in. Winifred began to wake up. In the doorway stood two strange figures. They began waving their arms excitedly. "Hello, Winifred. We're here to take you home," they cried. "You haven't been forgotten." The two men ran over to her. Winifred blinked several times. The taller man leaned over. "Do you want to come home?" he said. "Back to Wales," said the other. There was a long pause. Then she smiled. "Awesome," mumbled Winifred sleepily. Along came a forklift truck and a telehandler to carry Winifred out of the shed. The telescopic arm of the telehandler reached forward and lifted the front, and the forklift truck lifted back. "Whoa, she's heavy, steady, Anne," shouted Woody the driver as the truck tipped forwards. Winifred was as heavy as 2 elephants. As Winifred was slowly carried out of the shed, she called out to the cars, "Goodbye, guys." Then she was carried over to a large metal box. Winifred was delighted to feel her wheels touch the rails that had been placed in front of the box. Suddenly, Mr. Morris cried, "No!" and he ran forward to the tape measure and climbed onto Winifred's footplate to measure her. "Your chimney is too tall. We'll never get you in. It'll have to go." "Please don't take my chimney away," cried Winifred. "We'll put it back when you're in Wales, my dear," said Mr. Burley, and he patted her saddle tank reassuringly. So the chimney was removed. Then the telehandler extended his long telescopic arm and gently pushed Winifred. Her wheels started to go round. "Yee-haw, I'm moving," cried Winifred as she rolled along the rails into the container. "See you in Wales," said Mr. Burley. "I'm taking you to live the Bala Lake Railway." And the two men waved as the doors of the container closed. Winifred was now in the dark, but she could feel the whole box move as a crane drive lifted the container onto a semi-trailer. "Home," she said, smiling, as she sat in the dark. Now it was time to collect Winifred's friends, Ogwin and Glitter. Winifred had been kept in a clean, dry, modern warehouse, but her friends had spent all those years at a disused stable. "Good grief, what is that?" said Mr. Morris as two furry creatures scurried down from Ogwin's footplate. "It's a bit whiffy," said Mr. Burley. There were raccoons everywhere, and they had pooed on the footplate. "I'm taking you to the Beamish Museum in County Durham," said Mr. Morris to the engines. Then Ogwin and Glitter were lifted onto metal sheets and towed out of the stable. A huge container arrived and was lifted by crane onto the ground in front of the engines, where some rails were placed in front of it. Once again, Mr. Morris got out his tape measure. "Your chimney has to go," he said to Glitter. "What about our cabs?" said the engines. "I think they'll do," said Mr. M. Ogwin and Glitter only just managed to squeeze into the container. "Goodbye, dear," they said to each other. "See you back in Blighty." And soon they too set off on the long journey back home. Several weeks later, a cargo ship arrived at Southampton. Somewhere deep in the midst of all those containers was Winifred. On a sunny day at the Bala Lake Railway, a large container arrived on a lorry. It was carefully lowered down onto rails in the yard. Winifred was very excited. She knew she was back on dry land. She could hear people and birds and sheep. "I'm home," she cried. "I'm home." Mr. Burley opened the doors of the metal box, and there was Winifred smiling at everyone. "Let me pour you out," cried Alice. So Mr. B and Rob the engineer linked up the engines, and Alice carefully towed Winifred out the box. Suddenly Winifred saw the diesels. They looked pretty miserable. "Sorry we were so mean when we took your job," they called out. Winifred knew that the diesels missed out on a great adventure and had lost their jobs. She smiled back. "Chill out, guys," she said. "I've had a great time." Then everyone gathered round, and Mr. B made a speech. "Welcome back," they all cried. Then the people cheered, and the engines too did their whistles. Winifred smiled at everyone. "Thank you," she said. "I'm so happy to be home."